So, Louis, here we are again for another property update.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for doing this with us, actually. So, it's always nice to be able to update the market generally as the case is. Yeah.
Last time we sat down here, you described the mood as cautious and the market as nervous. 3 months on, almost 4 months on, actually. Has something shifted since then?
Yeah, for sure. And going back to last time we spoke, I mean, that was generally the mood and has been the mood, I think, for a number of years now. Nervousness, cautiousness, uncertainty, things I think that we in Gibraltar we've been used to for many, many years. But yeah, the past couple of years have been that. Yeah, last time we spoke, that was very much the case. And I think certainly over the past 3 or 4 months, we have seen some changes and some very positive changes. So we are now at a stage where we started the year well, and I think that's when we last did the podcast. And I think I alluded to the fact that things were a little bit better, and that's certainly been the case following on the next sort of 3-4 months leading up to today. We've seen a little bit more positivity. We've seen sort of a slightly higher turnover of sales happening within price ranges that maybe over the past couple of years had been quite slow and nervous, so to speak. So we're certainly encouraged by the fact that slowdown and if you like pause of volumes of sales that we've experienced over the past couple of years, understandably so, as has been discussed between us over the past few months, has changed now for sure. Yeah, so we're seeing that movement happen in the sectors that we'd like to see that movement happen in. Yeah.
One thing that has changed since we last sat down is that we have a clear treaty implementation date that's proposed for the 15th of July.
Mm-hmm.
Does having that date finally turn some of that confidence or cautiousness into action?
Yeah, and I think, again, that goes back to things that we've discussed before, even from last year when the treaty was announced, I think back in June of last year, if I'm not mistaken. And then we had a date for, I think, April, and that's obviously then been delayed to July. There's no question that all of that has led to more positivity, a little bit more confidence, particularly so with clients who are in some shape or form already connected to Gibraltar or in Gibraltar. So I think prior to the announcement, prior to that treaty announcement, if you like, in June, even those who were connected or in Gibraltar were just nervous of, is this really going to happen? When the announcement was made, that's sort of expressed positivity throughout the market. But as I'd said at the time, it wasn't going to happen overnight, and we weren't going to see huge movement overnight, and that was generally the case. As we've got closer to, if you like, the announcement of a date, which was initially in April, we felt that, and that was really the last that we spoke, with the extension to July. But I think now real evidence of this happening, the news, the media, and so far as what we've seen with the government chief minister, attorney general, etc., and meetings they've had with the Spanish politicians, you physically feel the tangibility, if you like, of this happening, and that's had an impact, no question. So I think for any external users or any external clients looking to come over who don't know or understand Gibraltar, they may still be waiting, and they may be waiting to come in for this. But for anyone who's already in Gib, has already had connections in Gib, I think that's where we've seen the turnaround of people saying, "Yeah, we're gonna jump in now."
I think that treaty implementation date has created a lot of not uncertainty necessarily, but there's buzz, right? There's buzz in the economy, retail, different sectors. If you had to describe the mood or the state of the property market in a couple of sentences, what would that be?
Certainly more positive. Certainly with a greater deal of confidence by comparison to what we've had. I mean, you've mentioned a few things there: retail, commercial, there's property, there's financial services, there's all these things. I think certainly from a financial services, economic perspective, property perspective, and things related to financial services, there's certainly a positive mood. with regards to how Gibraltar moves forward. I think let's not forget my view, and I think most people will share this, is that the agreement really was designed around protecting the big income earners of the economy. And that's really financial services, it's gaming. Obviously, that has a positive impact on property because they are the higher value clients, if you like. So from that perspective, it's been good. I think other sectors like retail, wholesale, maybe not as positive insofar as giving you a short sentence, if I can, of how they may feel. And I think, from my perspective, the deal generally, I think, will be very, very good for Gibraltar. I think it'll maybe kick off quicker in certain sectors and be very, very evidently positive and quickly in those sectors, as I've mentioned before, and maybe slightly different and slower in other sectors insofar as understanding how all this is going to pan out. I think the general view is that retail is certainly one of those sectors that may need to sort of flex and move with the time, so to speak. But I think at the same time, and I've said this before, I think that's an opportunity for those in that sector to maybe redesign their business models to suit and show how this agreement will and can positively impact those sectors. We're going to have a lot more people coming through the border with less hassle, so there's potentially more footfall into Gibraltar. Who are those people going to be? What are their profiles going to be? What's their buying power? So I think all that changes. I think also what we sell and what we've been used to selling insofar as retail. I mean, there's a lot of tobacco, there's a lot of alcohol, things like that. That's going to change insofar as the tax implemented on it. And therefore it may no longer be as attractive. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think we've all wanted to maybe wean ourselves off tobacco insofar as the economic stance is concerned. And therefore, what other retail elements could come into play to refocus that and rebalance that? And I think there are opportunities there for sure.
Coming back to property and Gibraltar's property market, if someone had been maybe sitting on the fence or waiting for some of the uncertainty, could they have potentially missed the most interesting buying window?
Again, I answered a similar question last time in saying never ask an estate agent have they missed a window, because my answer is going to be, of course you've missed the window, you must buy now. No. Look, the market moves in weird and mysterious ways. No one can I don't think anyone can predict the market because there are so many variables. I mean, that's not just the property market, it's stocks, it's, everyone can say, yes, we know, but the reality is that we don't know because of the variables that there are. What we do know is that we went through a boom period. I mean, we've been through lots of boom and bust, not bust, but booms and sort of trickle downs, etc., and waves. And those waves, interesting you mentioned that, actually all culminate over a period of the last 30 years, which is, we've been involved in the sector for 30 years now. And we have on our market updates the graph that shows what property prices generally have done and what GDP has done over the period of time. And generally, it's actually a very healthy curve that goes up. It's not a peak and trough, and therefore what we do know historically is that Gibraltar has continuously grown. We've had peaks and troughs, but it's continuously grown. We know that recently we've been through a huge boom, 2019 and 22. We've talked about this a lot before. And then from 22 to 25, we've seen that sort of realignment, and I prefer to say realignment as opposed to recession, because I think at the end of the day, the high rate per square meter achieved in 22 was still relevant throughout that realignment. So in answer to your question of, is it a good time or not, have we missed the boat? I think the answer would be no. I don't think we've missed the boat. I think there are going to be huge gains that we'll see because of the agreement. I think that's generally the view. It's not going to be a wholesale, everyone does extremely well. I think there are particular segments that will do better than others, and that's based on location, it's based on quality, it's based on amenities, it's based on age of the development, It's based on size of the properties that you're talking about. But in general terms, I think there are certainly, the view is there are going to be more gains than losses insofar as property prices are concerned as we enter, if you like, this new chapter in Gibraltar.
We've done a few of these kind of chats and talked about the property market so many times. And one thing that I completely get that you are right on is that we're not going to see a change overnight. Change, this, especially the one that we're facing, is going to take months, years, and things to take place. Flipping that and seeing that we're seeing some optimism and some movement in the market. Where is the movement in the market happening now? In which sector?
Different sectors. Where we'd like to see it, and I think we are seeing it, is sort of the sector of, say, between 700,000 to 1.52 million. That slowed down a bit, and that's, if you like, our mainstay. It's incredible to say that in a place like Gibraltar, your average mainstay value is between 700 and 1.5 to 2 million, but that's the reality. That I think is a sector that is the one that, if you like, gives clear indicators that everything else is following suit and doing well. We've obviously got the affordable housing sector, but that's affordable housing. It's generally driven by locals. There's always going to be demand for that. Government could never build enough insofar as affordable housing is concerned. So and that's not something that we're involved in. Yes, we're involved in from a resale perspective, and that's churned along. But insofar as new business is concerned and Gibraltar continuing to grow is concerned, I think the sector between 700 and 1.52 million is a very important one, which we've certainly over the past couple of months seen. We've seen it actually in resales in Midtown, the last phase of Midtown, which had been slow insofar as resales prior to, or certainly during 22-25. Normally with off-plan developments, you tend to see the gains where the market is good towards the end. This is now the end of that development, if you like. It's completing in the next sort of 6 months or so. And we're seeing what's happening is we're not seeing those resales either come down in value or not happen. They're actually happening. There are some, good profits being made. What's also interesting is that the buyers, and I think this is the key element, are owner-occupiers. These aren't re-speculators re-speculating. These are people moving in because they want to move into these properties as their home. And I think that says a great deal. It's not a huge development. It's about 70 units. But I think all these are good indicators.
You mentioned Midtown in there, saying that there's some movement there and sales and resales have gone well. If you were an investor coming into the market now, where are the kind of the genuine opportunities that you can see in the horizon?
Depends what you're after. If it's a standard, small investor looking for a buy-to-let or whatever, I think there are opportunities in areas like Midtown. There are always going to be opportunities in areas like, for example, Raggedstaff and frontline key frontline properties and prime properties like Raggedstaff and King's Wharf, etc. And those are, that can be 1, 2, 3 bedrooms. Yields at the moment are slightly up from where they were, probably about 4.1, 4.2% if you get a decent deal. But you're paying high prices for these locations, and therefore some people may think, well, actually, I'm still paying 8.5, 9.5, 10,000 pounds a square meter, which is quite a bit. You can maybe get some better value in different areas like Devil's Tower Road, for example, where you're paying far less, but where there's higher volume, smaller properties, more being built there. So I think it's really for the investor to analyse what they're after. Interest rates obviously have been falling. I think they've stayed there, but that's been good insofar as that capture of buy-to-let investors potentially comes back into play as it had been. But then you've got other investors. Then you've got investors who, you've got family offices, you've got funds that look at a different type of investment rather. It's not a property, individual property, it's rather a building with good yields, with long-term tenants, with capital appreciation. It's been interesting that we've been involved in quite a few of those over the past couple of years. Maybe not between 23 and 25 because things had gone cold then, but certainly prior to 22, we saw significant amounts come in, and we were involved in quite some large, interesting projects of buildings, which were commercial office buildings, which had been sold, where the returns are great. We've started to see that happen again now. Okay. There are one or two, big clients, family offices that have been buying anyway, and again, they've had the foresight to do that over a period of time when we've seen that slow period, if you like. So I think, in answer to your question and the previous ones, I think the upshot of it all is that regardless of the profile of the client or investor or owner-occupier, there seems to be that mood of it could be the right time now.
Okay. With that, I think that, one of my questions is around, I guess, on the lower end or the opportunity side of it, and a word that doesn't get used very much with Gibraltar's property prices at least, but is there any segment of the market which is kind of undervalued at the moment?
I think it's difficult to say to someone that a 3-bedroom in Midtown, for example, at 1.3, 1.4 million is undervalued because it's 1.3, 1.4 million. And I think ultimately when it comes down to being undervalued, or it really boils down to what's the demand for this and what's the demand going to be for this. If we feel that there's going to be demand at that sort of level, where Gibraltar has moved completely away from brass plating, where generally people, because of the residency rules, which hopefully we'll hear of soon, it's going to be about people living in Gibraltar because they have to have larger properties. One can say, okay, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms are going to be in demand because we're going to have people coming into Gibraltar who can't just buy a studio and say, I've got residency. So one might argue that although 1.2, 1.3 million for a 3-bedroom property is a lot of money, actually, if you've not got very many of those available, and we know that the drive is going to be that, one might argue that they are undervalued. We did, and I'm not here to sort of boost any particular development, but we were involved in the consultancy on one Bayside, which when we priced it in 2022, 23, I think it was driven by, let's make sure we get the sales done so that we can build this, and actually it's going to be ready in about a year's time. It's built, the structure's there. I think there's good value there to a large degree. Why? Because look, you're not front line, you haven't got amazing views, but there are good views. But you're buying 3 bedrooms which are 140, 150 square meters for under $1 million. That's actually really good value. So, it depends on the profile, but I think in general terms, you can find value, but it just depends what your view of Gibraltar is moving forward. Again, as an estate agent, as a property person, as a Gibraltarian, as someone who's got confidence in Gibraltar, my view is that Gibraltar will do well, and therefore, in most cases, you will find value because we only see the market generally doing well. We've been through that bottoming out, and I think with the agreement, we will see things pick up extremely well. And I think there's a lot to be said for what the agreement and the residency rules will impose insofar as criteria for people to come over, and how that's going to have, I think, generally a positive impact in the mainstay of the market, some more than others, some segments more than others.
You touched on it there, and it was just on my next question, which is the pause in residency applications, or the go slow, which seems to be happening right now. Is that affecting the market that you're seeing, and is it affecting your business?
Yeah, look, ultimately someone comes along to Gibraltar and says, I want to become a resident. You can't. You can't, and you've got to go through the process. So has it affected us? Yes, but actually not to the degree where we're sort of twiddling our thumbs doing nothing. We're still doing business. We're still feeling some positivity. So one can only imagine, once those rules are in place, that it's only going to get better. And I think that's what I'm alluding to. Yeah. We're almost waiting and we're just desperate to get there, but actually we're already feeling that positivity. Those rules, I would suspect, have to be quite strict across the board, whether it's Cat 2, HEPs, or whatever that's going to be called, and normal residency, because of the spirit of the agreement, and because something we talked about in the last podcast, because of protecting to a degree what we as Gibraltarians and any resident in Gibraltar already currently enjoys across the board, health and education, lifestyle, so those things are important, and I think where the residency comes into play is to what degree do you open it up, which could be dangerous because then you have potentially flows of UK nationals thinking, I want to be part of that because of the benefits of being resident, and therefore let's not open it up too much because we've got to be careful. And then at the same time, the other extreme, closing it too much, where we don't bring anyone in. So there's that balance. Obviously, it takes quite it must have been and must be a very difficult situation for government and those involved in creating this to assess and to deploy, if you like. And
on that note, I think it is a challenge, and it's almost an impossibility to get these residency rules right. What are you hopeful for in the new rules? Is there anything that you would want?
You open it up to everyone, therefore. No, and I say that in jest, of course. As a Gibraltarian and as a business person involved in property, and going back to that description of that wonderful healthy curve that we've had over the past 30 years, I'd like to see a continuation of that healthy curve, and that means making sure that if we open up too much, you potentially can have a boom, and then maybe a bust. If you close too much, So I think it's the right balance. If you're asking me what I think that right balance is, it's so wide. But for example, I would suspect there are going to be controls as to maybe potentially even age limits of anyone coming to Gibraltar. Certainly controls insofar as, when I say age limits is, are we going to allow loads of pensioners to come over to Gibraltar? Well, actually that puts quite a stray on health service. Can anyone from the UK just come in and become resident? Well, I would imagine no, not without an employment or within an established company. So I think there's all of these things that are probably in play which have to be in play. Otherwise it becomes a free-for-all within a jurisdiction that is offering so much if you become resident. That's just normal residency. On Cat 2, I think I mentioned before in the last podcast, that I imagine will change. I think has to change dramatically, and I think I also mentioned in the last podcast, I don't really repeat myself too much, but when you've got the current status that we've had for many years, which is essentially 2 million net worth, that represents already as it is 1% of the UK. So you're potentially opening yourself up to 1% of the UK knocking on our door. So that has to change, and of course it will change. I think I mentioned, I would suspect it'll go from between 5 and 10 million of investable cash as opposed to net worth. So these things are important because it allows the community and Gibraltar to protect itself and hopefully continue to enjoy the wonderful benefits we've enjoyed, whilst at the same time, almost sort of by default, brings in people who continue to add value to Gibraltar, whether it be on normal residency because they're coming to work, whether it be in the Cat 2s. And I think that's really important, that something that we've seen for the past 20, 30 years. When you look at the reasons that Brexit happened because you had a community in the UK quite upset about immigration and the fact that people were just stealing from their own benefits, and we were having to, and you can understand that whether you agree with what the UK did or not is another matter. We haven't had that. So if you look at the population increase we've had in Gibraltar over the past 30 years, it's really only been people who've come in to work. In addition to that, the people who've come in to work have been coming into work in sectors which are new, like gaming. So we've Gibraltarians have benefited from that on gaming, on financial services, because we've studied that, we've worked in it, we've grown in it, and we've benefited from it. The people that have come over have been, if you like, specialist skills, a lot of them people coming over. That has only added value to the community that we have. You've got almost 0% unemployment. You've got industries that are leading the way in the world, in gaming, in DLT, etc. So I think we've already done that and achieved a great deal in that respect because of how it's been panned out. Now, this agreement, I think, is only going to solidify that even more and maybe take us to a different level.
It's almost like immigration here is the context is so different, and the type of immigration that we have is totally different. So we'll have to watch that. The way that I kind of see it, because over the last couple of years we've been talking about property. I think back to one of the first shows we did, and it felt like almost like we're under a Levante cloud. There was a lot of uncertainty. We didn't know if the treaty was ever going to happen. Then it got announced. Now we have a date. Then we had a date. Then another date. But it feels like that's lifting, right? And it feels like once the residency, it's another, and we'll have a bit more clarity, right? So in an economy that's used to uncertainty and operating within that, I think I feel anyway that we're getting to a place that feels.
Yeah, well, be careful how you feel. I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you completely. But it's really weird because I think for the past, I've been in business now for nearly 30 years. Well, actually, for 30 years. There's not one year in the past 30 years where I haven't been worried about something. You're right, though. You're right in that. I think since 2016, it's just been, really, really hard work from a confidence perspective, from a certainty perspective, from being able to provide certainty to clients, etc. But we've done it. It's one of those things, and you go back to different phases in Gibraltar, political with Spain, with change of government. I think it was one time in the previous government under the GST under Peter Caruana where we were getting somewhere, I'm not sure politically, quite advanced insofar as agreements. It could have been the Gordoa during that stage. I can't remember, but there was. I lie. It was Bebe. Bebe were in, and they were being quite aggressive towards Gibraltar. And I think, unfortunately, there was, if I remember the other day, there was the Madrid bombings, which very quickly led to the change of government to PSOE. Again, unfortunate that you had the bombings. That was horrific. But that led to Rajoy, who was set to win the election, which was pretty not great for Gib because we were under strain there, and the PSOE came in under Zapatero, I think, at that stage. And I remember being in an event at some stage with Peter Caruana at the time, and we were talking about how Gibraltar can be quite lucky in these situations where we think we're at the end of the road and suddenly these things change. And he made a comment which is quite funny where he said where the world is in crisis, God sends his angels. When Gibraltar is in crisis, God comes himself. And I think we've been in these situations over so many years where you think this is it. Brexit 2016, oh my God, this is going to be. And suddenly, we're in a situation where the Gibraltar government and, at this stage, Fabian Picardo, ends up, dealing and negotiating directly with Madrid. I mean, it's incredible.
No, it is nuts to think of where we've been, all of the hurdles and opportunities on the way. Given the global context and where we are right now, my last question actually was going to be where do you see us in 12 months? Which is kind of impossible, but if we're keeping the same kind of tailwind as we are now, what are your hopes for the market in a year?
Well, 4 months ago, I think when we last saw each other, I said that you asked a similar question. I said we may see this sort of excitement and positivity and confidence and movement in the market happen, maybe aggressively or not, but certainly in 2026.
Yeah,
it's happening. So using that as a comparable, I would say the next 12 months, I'd like to think are going to be very, very good. particularly because of what we've already experienced in the past 4 months since we last spoke, with what we're seeing, with what we're doing. So I think in general terms, good, but that's just agreement based. I mean, then we could look at many other things. How many developments are being built, and is the volume too much? And in general terms, I think over the next 12 months, it's certainly not going to be worse than the past 12 months.
Okay. Well, that's a really nice place to end the show. I'm sure that we are going to talk before 12 months' time is up anyway. Louis, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.